Hey, this week Dan joins me and we talk with Pádraig Brady about Coreutils. That's software that pretty much everybody runs, whether you realize it or not. And because of some reasons, it is one of the most conservative development processes we've ever talked about. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 797, recorded August 20th. Don't RM-RF up the tree. Hey everybody, it is time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and we've got a fun show today. We're going to be talking about Coreutils. And no, that's not a typo, not a mistake. We did just talk about Coreutils. But about 3-4 weeks ago, we talked about Rust Coreutils. And this week, we are talking about the OG, as I like to say, the original Coreutils. Still a project. It is not just me, though. Of course, I've got Dan the Man, Method Dan, the original Linux outlaw. Hello, sir. Welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's always good to have you with us. Dan, I suspect that you sort of have a clue about Coreutils. You've at least used them a few times over the years, right?
Oh God, yeah. I was just thinking earlier that I would bet that anybody who uses Linux as their operating system has, even if they don't know it, interacted with the projects we're going to talk about today.
Yes,
either directly or indirectly.
Right. And you know, there's several different implementations of Coreutils because you've got the Rust Coreutils, which is fairly new, but you've also got things like BusyBox that also includes a bunch of the Coreutils, but with a different code base. And so they're ubiquitous. I mean, there's probably, oh goodness, if you count the other versions of it, there are probably billions of copies of Coreutils in the world, and that's something. Not everybody can say that they've got that many of their binaries running around. All right, well. We've got the man. We've got Pádraig, and he is, I believe, the head maintainer. We'll have to ask him exactly what his title is, but he is the man in the Coreutils project. That's Pádraig Brady, and let's go ahead and bring him on. Pádraig, welcome, sir.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, it is great to have you.
Hey.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
All right, so what is your official title, as it were? I believe you're the head honcho, but that's probably not what they call you.
I wouldn't say that. It's open source, so there's no real official title. But I'd say if you had to give me one moniker, it'd be release manager, and I'm one of the maintainers. There's a few of us. So. Okay. And I've been contributing to Coreutils for the last 22 years. 22
years sounds like a very long time, except Coreutils has been around for quite a bit longer than that, hasn't it? How old is the project? Indeed.
Well, there's. I guess it was originated around 92. I think it's when. Well, there were original. It was a bit separated into file utils, text utils, and shell utils. And then a little while after that, it was amalgamated into a single Coreutils project. Okay. So that was done by Jim Meyering.
Okay. Now, and the original Coreutils. Some of these utilities go all the way back to like Ritchie and Kernighan, way back in the day with the original Unix. Is there any shared code base?
No. So the GNU. So part of the GNU thing was to be kind of a complete separate implementation. Okay. So they were implemented separately. The GNU source base is completely separate. But of course, like there's a huge focus on compatibility with those older utils and with other systems. And I guess at this stage, we've been developing them so long. There's an onus to be backwards compatible with ourselves. So that's a huge concern.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I mentioned in the pre-show we had the Rust Coreutils project on, and that was one of the really interesting things. So first off, there's not animosity between the two projects, but in fact you guys are cooperating on some things. And one of the really interesting places of cooperation is in writing sort of this shared test suite that determines that all of these tools do the same thing no matter which implementation you're looking at, which that really interested me.
Well, absolutely. Look, at the implementation is secondary after the day. At the end of the day, it's the interfaces with users, and that's I guess, encoded in the test suite. So we put a huge emphasis on the test suite, and it's something personally I've been focused on all along. Like any kind of changes or patches we do tend to be mostly focused on it. Most of the effort is actually put into testing and writing tests for a patches. So in regards to the Rust Coreutils, I actually like a few years ago I noticed with interest the Rust Coreutils project and suggested that they could easily tie in the Coreutils test suite because it was kind of written like that. So the Rust test driver, they essentially put Coreutils earlier in their path and just call our test suite, and it automatically pulls in the Rust utility. So we write our test suite to be with portability in mind. Because we have to run our test suite in a lot of places, so Rust the Rust Coreutils gets to take advantage of that.
Yeah,
and just to mention it's worth mentioning that it's a two-way thing. So sometimes the Rust folks, when they're implementing new utilities, they might notice bits that we haven't tested, and they'll supply patches to us, and we'll implement those. So it just verifies our code is working as expected. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's neat. And I've found that test suites like that, what they're really, really useful for is when you make changes, they sort of help you guarantee that your changes didn't accidentally break something that you didn't think about when you were making the change. That's
100%. Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, we put a huge effort into the performance of the test suite. Like you can run all the tests, say on a standard laptop in about 50 seconds. But the nice thing, I've run it on really fast machines, and it automatically scales up, so you can run all the tests in 5 seconds. but
that's impressive.
$100,000 machines.
Yeah, well,
but it's not. It's not nice that it scales up, and it kind of, I guess, it shows the advantages of the Unix model, because we try to, rather than saying writing the test suite in something separate like driving it with Perl or Python or something like that, we actually it's mainly shell scripts. So we're kind of reusing the model and reusing all the tools while testing, writing the tests themselves. And it shows that that's one of the nice things about having separate processes to do separate things. They automatically scale out to multiple processors, and so it nicely scales up automatically using the standard Unix model.
Yeah. So a question that kind of naturally flows out of this conversation is, what about the original Unix version of these utilities? Is there any cross-pollination with any of those? Like, I guess we might be in a place where one of the original Unixes, somebody's version of Unix, uses Coreutils rather than the old Unix code base. In fact, that's probably likely. And then I guess also the original Unix version of the Coreutils, do we run those through the test suite to see what they do?
It's yeah, well, I haven't done it myself. It's an interesting question. I'm sure a lot of them would break, like the test, like Rust Coreutils is trying to be compatible with the latest GNU upstream. So there are new options and behaviors really there. So I guess a lot of the older variants would break in most ways against the existing test suite. So
yeah, that's interesting. Do you know, does anybody's Unix ship Coreutils rather than the old code?
I don't think so. So the main focus with Coreutils is Linux. And essentially these days Linux is ubiquitous. So that's generally what everybody really uses. Like in the large tech companies, it's all Linux internally.
Unix itself is kind of dead these days, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. It's and that kind of gets onto the kind of the portability aspects. It's still very important. Less going forward. as we say, because things are more and more focused and more consolidated on Linux. But there's still a lot of portability concerns with compilers, different compiler options, different shells. And we still try to be as portable as possible. And when you keep as portable as possible, it keeps your code as flexible, I guess, as soft as possible, and keeps the interfaces true and separate and good.
Yeah. I mean, Pádraig, you mentioned there that the portability and stuff, and Jonathan said nobody really uses Unix anymore, which I imagine will probably upset a few people. But sure. I'm not much of an expert, but I'm wondering, do people ship Coreutils with BSD at all?
Yeah, so that would be our main other Unix portability target, and we have full. Personally, I have access to like BSD. We have access to free BSD systems, and kind of implicitly through macOS that they use kind of free BSD interfaces.
So I was interested in macOS. I was going to say because you've got Darwin, which is the kind of the base under macOS, and they must use Coreutils, I would imagine.
They actually try like Apple tries to steer clear for GPL3 reasons, but there are a lot of users of Coreutils. It's in Homebrew, for example, so it's easily installed on macOS, and for a long time the sort, for example, the sort that was used in FreeBSD and macOS was actually the GNU version, because that's actually quite difficult to implement and stuff like that. But getting back to the testing, like we do kind of put on orders to make sure that we have full tests passing on macOS and FreeBSD.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned that you've been working on this you've been involved with the project for 22 years, which is impressive. I'm always really intrigued in how people got started in these things and how they got involved. So how did you come to get involved with the project? How did you get interested in it? Was it something it was computing something you were into as a kid, or, how did all that come about?
Well, not as a kid. I'm not going to say my age now, but I hadn't access to a computer until kind of midway through college. So I started very late from that point of view. But I started first also with Windows, which is interesting. And I was using that through college, and then went into industry for a year or so and got a bit frustrated with the whole black box nature. You come to a problem, and then it was really difficult to actually fully fix things. So you're working around issues more and more rather than actually fixing core issues. So then I happened upon Linux was just starting out at the time. I guess that's alluding to my age. And at that stage, then it's something that resonated with me. I tinkered around with it for a couple of years, and at that stage, then I kind of the Unix model really resonated with me, and I saw like there was I noticed that some of the core utilities would they benefit from some new options, and so I proposed a few patches around 22 years ago, and they were accepted. And ever since then, I became a kind of an official maintainer. Maybe about I suppose 16 years ago now.
Wow, that's amazing. I always love how people get involved in these things, because I think one of the great things about the kind of free open source software world is how, without meaning to be cheesy, open it is, in that you can get involved. What were the challenges in kind of getting involved? Were you nervous about maybe submitting a patch and getting, rejected in some way?
No, I was very excited. I remember my first patch, how naive I was. I was worried about, well, the code was okay, but I was worried about someone was going to come up with the idea. It's one of the funny things I look back on. I thought someone was going to, it was such an obvious thing, I thought someone was going to come up with the idea, and I was mad to get the patch in before anybody else did. But sure, of course, even there's an infinite amount of code to write and an infinite amount of ideas, so that's never an issue. Yeah. So that's one thing I would say to people is, even if something is implemented already, there's always a way to do it better. So always err on the side of sending in the patch, and generally the people involved in these projects are more interested in the tech itself and are very interested in incorporating new people and new code into the projects.
Yeah, and a question that I have to ask, it's the kind of dirty question in the room, but I'm really interested, is have you managed to get paid for working on Coreutils? Has that been like part of your job at any of the, because I know you've worked in lots of places.
Sure, not directly,
right?
But I wouldn't be working where I was without having worked on your Coreutils. Let's put it like that. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of. It's a good thing on your CV.
Yeah.
Yeah, no joke.
And
they say,
and I know you've contributed to it. Sorry, go on, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, they say with the kernel itself that it's like landing 5 bits of code, landing 5 pull requests in the kernel is the average that it takes for someone to get a job offer as a result from it. Like there are a few places where contributing open source code is just excellent for your career, and I imagine something like Coreutils is going to be on that list.
Yeah, it's just, well, I guess anybody who's used, as I said at the start of the show, anybody has used Linux at all has either used them directly, and everybody knows about them. So it's good for the CV, as we say. Yep. I've been very lucky over the years, really, to have been. I feel very lucky to have been involved with the project, and it's still very interesting and rewarding going forward. So it's all good.
Yeah. I'm interested in how, I know this is probably an obvious question, but I'm interested in how the project's managed. You mentioned that you've got, obviously there's a few maintainers involved, probably quite a lot of maintainers, I would imagine. How does it compare to something like the kernel project? Do you manage it all through Git and the releases and all the patches and everything else?
Yeah, so we moved to Git fairly early on. Patches are managed with a mailing list. Still, the number of maintainers, there are, I guess there are 3 or 4 kind of central core maintainers that work on it over the years. There's a separate project, so kind of focusing on the portability aspect. There's GNU Lib project, which is probably slightly a bit more active. And there could be, say, 50 projects reusing the portability code that is abstracted away or encapsulated away in the GNU Lib project. And but GNU Lib was kind of originated as Coreutils. So there were, looking at it simply, there were lots of if-defs in the Coreutils code, and that was gradually moved across to a separate project to keep. So GNU Lib presents a GNU interface everywhere, and then it allows the actual projects using GNU Lib to be a lot cleaner and just assume a GNU interface is available.
It seems like code bases just grow if-def statements over the years. It's just a natural part of their development.
Yeah. And especially something trying to port to every Unix and every compiler in the world. It's you have to be especially careful.
Yeah. Okay, so with a project that's been around as long as Coreutils has, and with sort of in some ways a frozen specification, what's it like to work on Coreutils, and is it done? Is there a place where it's going to get to be done? And what does it look like? And so I guess really what I'm getting at is, I asked that question very tongue in cheek, but what I'm getting at is, what does it look like in Coreutils to make changes? And I assume it's like a very conservative process to very slowly make changes and to do it very intentionally, right?
Well, yeah, you have to be something that's used so ubiquitously. You have to be very careful. So there's the whole, as I was mentioning earlier, the focus on testing. So that kind of handles that. But we have to be very cognizant of the interfaces, and also we have to be cognizant of our interfaces with the community. So there are lots of requests over time to add this option and that option, and a lot of them are good suggestions, but they're not just appropriate for adding, because the equivalent functionality might be in a separate tool, might be slightly dangerous. But we do take and we do make new additions ourselves over time to just add new functionality and port to new compilers and new architectures and enhance performance and portability and all that. So there's changes all the time. But just getting back to engaging with the community, like that's one of the things you have to be especially cognizant and careful about with an open source project. And one of the things we've done, for example, is we maintain a page of rejected requests, but they're very carefully considered and curated. And it like if someone comes in with their suggestion and we carefully consider it but reject it, we may add it to that page, but they can also see if it has, like often the same suggestion has been made multiple times. They can also see similar suggestions being rejected and with very carefully considered reasons given, and so they don't feel, I guess, alienated when we give feedback like that. But we're definitely very open to new features if they're appropriate. So it's just we have to be just careful of the backwards compatibility with ourselves, the compatibility going forward, and just being, I guess, generally cognizant of the Unix model and just being true to that and keeping things appropriate.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, progress bar. What does it look like when someone sends in a request? And let's just take the progress bar as an example. What's the process look like? Like, do the maintainers vote? And so, 3 out of 5 say this is a bad idea, so we're not going to pull it in. That's
essentially it. Yeah, and it all happens out in the open. The important thing is it happens in the open on the mailing list. So we give reasons why it mightn't be a good idea. That's an interesting one. That's one of those 50-50 ones, which is probably a good idea, but it's also implemented already in rsync and stuff like that. So right. Do you want to complicate the code base just to add that? That is one that we may actually add eventually. It's there's an interesting one like that. So that's getting back to the Unix model. So it might be nice to do that more generally. So looking at something like PV. So that's that's a separate progress viewer, and you can point it at any command, and it'll open up the file descriptors. And now it's not as general as if you put it directly in CP, but it's more general in that it will work with any command, and you can pop it in the middle of any pipeline. But one of the reasons we hadn't done that particular one was rsync is equivalent functionality that already has a progress bar, and looking at the Unix model of having one tool that's doing something more general, then there's the separate PV tool which can be pointed at a CP process, and it will inspect all its file descriptors and see how far along they are at reading and writing a file, and you can pop it into the middle of any command or any pipeline or directed at any command. So it's a more general solution.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, some of the other, like for example, the Rust Coreutils, they've gone ahead and they've added that in, I think at least in CP, maybe in some of the others, where it has now a built-in progress bar. And that's one of the fascinating things about having multiple implementations of this that are kind of looking at the same test suite and the same kind of core rules, but you have a little bit of flexibility as well to be able to do things just a little bit differently without breaking the rules.
Right. And it's an interesting thing. Like if there are kind of borderline functionality or new options like that that are already implemented elsewhere, that's more kind of more leeway for us to implement those for better compatibility.
Now, so the fact that this is, again, talking specifically about progress, the fact that this is still kind of being reconsidered, it makes me think that website, that page of these are the things that people have suggested that we are decided not to do, like that's not necessarily a static list, and you guys have the freedom to go back into that and sort of mine for ideas again and reconsider. Well, maybe this wasn't such a bad idea.
Absolutely, yeah, and so, some of them. That doesn't go for all of them. There's some
There's some real
ones.
special ones in there.
Yeah, not to. Well, this happened long ago. That I'm not singling anybody out here, but there was one suggestion that so for RM minus R to recurse down the way, you could have an option to recurse up the tree. But,
No.
yeah, we rejected that one pretty quickly.
That must have been like the April 1st RFC for the project.
No, there was some arguments for it, but
really,
and also implied the -F as well.
Just don't accidentally use that flag. Oh my goodness.
God, yeah.
And then what about when you? And I'm sure this has to happen from time to time, but I'm sure it has to be rare. What's the process if you say, okay, we're going to make a change and it's going to break something, but we're going to make it anyways? What does that look like? Has that happened? Is that going to happen?
it has happened. As we said, we're very careful about doing that. Generally, it's only on if it's associated with some extra functionality that we're doing. So we'll break compatibilities in some rare edge cases, just to allow you to add a lot of extra functionality. So it's rare we do that, and we err on the side of not doing that because, like, nobody wants to rewrite shell scripts when they upgrade from CentOS 10 to 11 or whatever. So we just have to be very careful about doing that.
Yeah. And is there anything sort of on the radar that is going to be breaking, or maybe otherwise a huge big change coming?
Nothing breaking interface wise.
Okay.
Like, look at retroactively looking back at some things. I have another, or we have another page kind of written of Coreutils gotchas.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things like you would never have done this originally if it was designed as one cohesive set of utilities. These things would have never, like just one gotcha, for example, DD. You often want to present hex numbers to DD because you're dealing with power of 2 blocks for inputting output to disk and stuff like that. So it'd be nice to supply hex numbers. So if you could, you can seemingly supply hex numbers like 0x100 for, say, a 256 byte block, but 0x100 to DD is 0 multiplied by 100, which is 0, which it accepts and goes ahead and just doesn't skip anything, for example. So there are little gotchas like that haven't been very carefully considered back in the day, but we have to keep compatibility with that going forward. Mm-hmm. And some place like we'll break compatibility slightly in that regard. For example, POSIX specifies if you're not giving an error, you shouldn't give a warning. Like if you're not exiting with an error status, you shouldn't give a warning. But in that case, we do give a warning because it is such an edge case that you probably wouldn't be doing 0 multiplied by something. But we give a warning in that case. So we break. That's not really breaking compatibility, but we're just very careful about how we approach these sort of things.
Yeah, interesting. All right, Dan, you want to pick it back up? I've lost the connection to our back server, so we're having to do it in the open.
It's all going on today.
It's been a fun one.
Yeah, I'm interested in one of the things that you actually mentioned, Pádraig, was the Unicode situation. And internationalization as well is another thing as well for character sets and so on. So what's the situation with that at the moment?
Yeah, so that it's a tricky kind of implementation thing that spans most of the utilities, especially the original text utilities. Personally, I was interested in doing that, and while I was working with Red Hat, I requested, say, a block of 3 months to go away and kind of just implement that, which wasn't granted, which is interesting. I was surprised at that at the time. Mm-hmm. So never had really a block of time that are required to go away and work. So that has kind of happened in piecemeal over the last few years. So the main Unicode functionality is currently encapsulated in GNU-lib, and there's a lot of Unicode expertise by the developers and the main developer Bruno Heibel of working on GNU-lib, and those interfaces have evolved a little bit over the last couple of years. They've added new abstractions for dealing with characters and multi-byte characters and cells and stuff like that. So that has been gradually being added to the Coreutils over the last while, and I kind of created a planning document, kind of describing the work that had to be done there. So at least we have a kind of an overview of what needs to change. So it will eventually happen. Just it's happening slowly at the moment. And one thing that has changed over the last while as well, like when we originally envisaged this, there was a lot of different character sets that were in use, but most things have consolidated on UTF-8 now. So that kind of suggests different ways of handling things, of converting everything to UTF-8 before processing, and maybe having separate tools for kind of sanitizing and working with UTF-8 and then as an interface to other utilities, rather than having each utility dealing with edge cases of missing codings and cases like that. So yeah, it's still a work in process. Still, I guess that would be the main kind of functionality or feature that is kind of outstanding in Coreutils at present.
Yeah, so it's a big one to deal with, I imagine. It's interesting that you said that I mean, without getting into politics too much, that you weren't granted the time to work on that. You'd think a lot of people would be after that, but who knows? Now, this is a slightly left field question, I suppose, because Jonathan mentioned BusyBox at the start. And I am going to show my ignorance now, because I'm not entirely sure of the relationship between Coreutils and BusyBox. So, seeing as you're here, I'm going to ask you: is there any kind of crossover between the two? I'm assuming not in code. How is the relationship between the two, and how does it work?
Well, definitely not in code. There is a little interaction sometimes between suggested new options and stuff like that. One interesting thing, like BusyBox is more geared towards embedded systems.
Yeah,
and it has, and there's different licensing and stuff to date with that. So the main difference there is licensing. Interestingly, a while ago, Coreutils was adjusted to be able to be built in the same single binary setup as BusyBox. So the standard way you would build BusyBox is as a single binary with symlinks, mapping the various command names to the single binary. And Coreutils can be built exactly the same way. So you can install Coreutils in, I think it's a couple of megabytes with symlinks to the single binary. So from a functionality point of view, Coreutils provides the same things, and I guess with more portability. But yeah, there's the licensing aspect. Would be the main difference there.
Now, you mentioned licensing, and my eyes lit up then because I'm a bit of a licensing nerd. I don't know why, I just find this stuff fascinating. Now, I was looking that I was interested that you're under GPL v3 with Coreutils, and it moved from GPL v2 or newer to GPL v3 or newer, I believe, about 2003 or something like that. So, were you around at the time, and what was the process like?
I wasn't involved in that licensing. I had a few earlier patches, and then I joined really the project a bit after that, in a more involved way, I guess. So I wasn't involved in the licensing, and I haven't really been involved in the licensing, any licensing issues or anything like that going forward. So I'm the wrong person to talk really about that. I'm more focused on the technical. And to be honest, all the core maintainers were focused on the technical aspects really. We are aware of some of the restrictions of GPL3, and just even from a political point of view, how some people just kind of shy away from it and keep things simple and just avoid it. So that's not ideal. But,
yeah, it's an interesting one. I've got the kind of little background to this for me is I have some friends who work at the Software Freedom Conservancy who are involved in a lot of that kind of that's licensing central right there. I know that they were very keen to get projects to move from V2 to V3 of the GPL, and some were keen and some were not, and some still haven't, like the kernel, of course. And so I just thought I'd ask, but that's fair, totally fair enough, that you weren't around or you weren't involved with the licensing at the time. Now, one of the things you mentioned to us in your email was that you worked for Meta for a good long time, and their use of Linux in the back and the stuff that you've done with them. So I'm really interested to dig into some of that, because I know that they have their own distribution. How does that work?
Sure. I can't go into very details about absolute numbers on anything like that, or details, but I'm happy to go into general information. And a lot of this information applies to all the big tech companies like Google and Amazon, that they all use the same sort of models and stuff like that. So I guess the interesting kind of general information was Meta is to have huge scalability requirements. So they have a huge focus on performance. Like if you got for example, 1% win out of a compiler, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It's the scalability is immense. But it's interesting as well, not in particular to Coreutils, but maybe more aligned with a project like glibc or kind of library code, that when you're working on these things in open source, it's used by Meta and Google and everybody else. So it actually has much larger scalability concerns, but it's not really as apparent, or I guess measurable to these people. So it's there's I guess that there's a huge onus and responsibility on people working on performance. Like when you make a change in Meta, everything is very, very easily tested, and you can see exactly the dollar values of changes, and so that's cool as well, because you can feed those. It's easier to test it. It's very hard to test things kind of up in open source world, because you have a lot more. It's just harder to test because you have a lot more disparate systems, and you haven't everything as tightly cohesive in a whole test framework and stuff like that. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship both ways. Like you get really good testing in a place like Meta, and then you can feed that information back up and feed the code back up. But there's an interesting thing as well, that like corporations like these, they get huge use out of open source code, but sometimes there isn't the focus on sending code changes back up, because just looking at the loop, there's a short-term win from not spending the time to send your changes back up into upstream. But then there's a long-term loss by not doing that, because you become forked and you kind of diverge away from all the improvements upstream as well. So that was a good bit of effort on my part in Meta, was kind of ensuring that all our internal processes and changes were getting code back up into the open source, so we didn't become diverged. And it's something that's really easy to fall into, but because of the short-term win and not doing it. Like even open source first companies like Red Hat back in the day, they originally got into that sort of situation. They had a forked kernel, and they actually got into a bit of a knot. They had a huge effort then to get out of that. So it's just an interesting thing for any tech company, or any company these days, since tech is involved in most things, that they have to be very wary of not forking away from upstream too much.
It's good that it's great that it sounds like they were supportive, at least in you contributing stuff back upstream. Was that something that, like, the management, without meaning to cause any trouble here, and feel free to tell me to, you don't want to talk about it, but I was just curious, with the management and so on, were they supportive in that? They were like, yeah, go and take a day to do this, or support it?
Absolutely. Like in Meta, at a certain level especially, you were encouraged to go off. You were trusted to do the right thing, as long as you presented the right arguments. Like they were happy as long as you're doing the right thing. So within Meta was very open source friendly, and increasingly going forward now with the AI ecosystems, that they're really kind of leveraging the open source aspect of that. So no, there was great support in Meta. I was kind of more alluding to the general kind of thought process of engineers in general within tech companies. They were focused on the short-term wins, and not on getting their like we're focused. We're working away in open source a lot, and most developers haven't that mindset of pushing stuff back up. Into the upstream.
That makes sense. We actually have a question. So there are people listening and watching us at the moment, and we have a question from Mashed Potato, who says, what's the relationship like with developers of Coreutils replacement tools such as Exa? Could Exa find its way into Coreutils to replace LS? Is there a good reason to keep LS as it is? That's quite a big question.
Well, absolutely. It's a long time since I looked at Exa. There are a few interesting. I do have a look at every so often at tools like this, and if there are interesting general functionality that would be appropriate for everybody to use, absolutely we would incorporate it into LS. The big thing you have to be wary about with making changes is the interface. You wouldn't move everybody to having to type Exa. The LS is kind of wired into everything at the moment. So, but you could add functionality, or the ideal thing is to adjust things. You have to be careful as well, but the ideal thing is to adjust things without requiring options or changes on behalf of the user. But you have to be careful. So LS is an interesting one. So it's an end user tool. So we made changes recently, and there were really good reasons for making the changes, which was to quote file names that had problematic characters in them, like spaces or characters that were special to shell, because it introduced, unless you quoted the names, there would be ambiguity with the spacing for delimiting file names, or the spaces within the file names, or you could have semicolons and you could put commands in there. So if people are copying and pasting, and you can, there's a lot of ways to hide stuff. So there was security implications there. So by default, we now quote the output of problematic file names from LS. And there was actually quite a lot of pushback from that from various people. And the main reason is because they weren't used to it, and like we have, of course, always provided a way to go back to the old behavior if we really wanted. But you just have to be very careful how you adjust these tools, especially stuff user-facing stuff like LS.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just went and looked. The exa command itself has been retired, and a fork ESA is now what is the latest and greatest. So, and I think
I'll have a look.
So yeah, it's interesting to look at because there's going to be some great ideas there. But what's also fascinating is that Coreutils has been around since 1992, and exa only lasted for however many years, and now the main developer of exa is missing and cannot be contacted anymore. Like just the fact that Coreutils has been successfully maintained for that long is it's a huge win, and not every project can say that they have that sort of a track record. That 20 years from now, you can pretty much guarantee that Coreutils is going to be around and still pushing out releases.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for companies kind of investing on a platform, and they're writing shell scripts and stuff like that, depending on all these utils, that there's a huge kind of responsibility for these things to stick around and be stable. And just another aspect of that example, it's good to expand on a particular example and look at all aspects of it. Like if we were to, say, take things out of ESA, now is it, and add them into LS, there might be a little bit of extra performance in every LS invocation, which that gets back to the point about how there's a responsibility on us to mine performance, because it moves out into all companies and all users.
Yeah.
There was one example there recently where file capabilities were colored, and file capabilities are one of the things that never really took off in Linux. So maybe 1 in a million files has capabilities now. So there's no real advantage of coloring. So there's an overhead there of every LS invocation looking at every file to see does it have file capabilities. And it's one of these kind of esoteric things. So it was never kind of the interfaces to detect file capabilities was never optimized over time. So kind of a rule of thumb, or kind of a what do you call it, back at the paper, a quick calculation I did was that by taking that out of LS, nobody really noticed, but it saved about $75,000 worth of electricity a year, just estimating the use of LS around the world. And so, which is, I don't know, maybe 40 households of electricity, just by not having this extra little bit of functionality in LS. So these things are important.
I'm so tempted to say something sarcastic about cryptocurrency there, but I think I'm going to just to not. So that idea of performance, though, that does bring to mind a really interesting question, and that is when, say, AMD pushes out their newest processor and it's got AVX 512 support for everybody now, and of course Intel has gated that off to their Pro line of processors. Are there changes that get made to some of these Coreutils because, hey, now we have AVX 512, and you can do string comparisons in AVX 512? Like, are you guys sort of on the cutting edge of that, watching those changes in processors and then therefore going in and making tuning changes in some of these commands?
I wouldn't say we're on the cutting edge, but we're definitely incorporating changes such as that. There's two aspects of that. We try not to implement everything ourselves. So, looking at the crypto side of things or the hash side of things, we, rather than implementing assembly / SIMD versions of those ourselves, we kind of push off to libcrypto or the OpenSSL libraries, because they're kind of ubiquitously available as well. So with version 3, we can, and the licensing changes there, we can without issue link to those. So we'll link to those by default if they're available, and use the fast version. So the checksum or SHA-SUM or SHA-256 or whatever, we'll use the latest version of those. But also within like core functionality ourselves, like for example, WC for counting lines, that can be done efficiently in SIMD code and AVX code. We do have code for that. We have to be careful in portability. So there are special portability constraints in how we set up the build. So we actually added libraries to the build system to support that. And that's how you officially, or kind of definitely separate all AVX instructions into separate compilation units in Automake world. So we have libraries that we internal libraries that we link to implement that for a few utilities now, and probably more going forward.
Yeah, I know in projects like the kernel and GCC itself, you have AMD and Intel employees that come through and send these big patch sets in. Like, here's support, or here's the tuning for the latest and greatest from our company. Do you guys get any of that in Coreutils? Are there at AMD.com and at Intel.com email addresses sending patches in?
No, to be honest, I've had interaction with those guys from working at Meta and various places and various other projects, but not directly in Coreutils.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I was going to ask about, Dan, what was I going to ask about? That was a short answer. I was going to look it up. Retiring commands. That's what it was. There are some Coreutils commands that have been around for years, for decades, and it's like some of these I don't think anyone has really used in decades. And is there a thought about, well, let's just retire these rather than making them continue to be part of the maintenance burden, or are they going to be around forever?
Good question. So there's two aspects to that, really. There's individual commands, and then there are classes of commands. So answering classes of commands at the initially, like for example, all the separate checksum commands, like MD5 sum, SHA-1 sum, SHA-256 sum. I'm not going to go on, but you could go on forever there, and that's kind of a bad way to do it, to have a separate command for each of those. So going forward, we're consolidating those in the checksum command. So you could go checksum -a, and then you select your algorithm there, and so we won't have any more of that class of command. Everything will be consolidated in checksum. And I guess in 20 years' time, we'll start removing SHA-386 sum or whatever, just to clean things up. So individual commands then, yeah, there are some commands that are less used, like PTX, tsort, this sort of thing. I guess the main idea there is that there's less maintenance. We don't put much maintenance focus. Like if we get a compiler warning out of them, we'll fix it up. Or if we get some security warning or whatever, we'll maintain it. But we won't put much effort into adding new features or changing functionality on those going forward. That's the main thing. As for removing the command, there's the big compatibility concern. Like These utilities are so used in that there's some edge case on some space probe in Mars or something using it. And look, we just can't. We can't. We probably can't remove commands, so it wouldn't be that much maintenance going forward. So, and on the other hand, that's why we have to be very careful of adding commands and even options in that regard. But in adding commands, we have to be very careful.
Yeah. All right. I do want to make sure and ask: is there anything that is coming that you wanted to? You wanted to let folks know about? Like, are there any future plans that you're particularly excited about?
I guess the main one you already asked about the internationalization and Unicode support. So that is something that's coming gradually, and we're definitely focused on that, and it's happening as we speak. In the last release or two, there have been updates to expand and unexpand and utilities like that for them to handle multi-path characters. So that will be coming. Perhaps there might be a new utility. We've mooted for a while about a replace utility. So it's interesting. To replace a file on Unix is actually really difficult. To do it with ACID principles and copying data around with ACID principles is actually really difficult. So it kind of makes a lot of sense to have that encapsulated in a separate command. Like rather than have sed -I, you can have the replace command and provide another command to do the actual processing, and then the replace would do all the complicated stuff about temporary files or kind of moving files to atomically and all that anarchy.
Yeah.
That's something that might be on the horizon. And then there's also always the ongoing maintenance of new kernel interfaces. For example, one thing that's changed recently that might allude to things going forward is we added, and we had to be very careful in how we added copy offloading. So copying a file is actually really primitive in POSIX interfaces. Like you have to copy the metadata separate to the data, and you have to. There's atomicity issues there as well, which gets back to the replace command. But recently, there's been the copy range command in the Linux kernel, and similar commands elsewhere, or similar functions elsewhere to provide copy offloading. And but we looked at those maybe 10 years ago and had a deep dive on those, and they weren't stable enough either in interface or functionality. So we provided feedback to the kernel folks then. And more recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to start using these things. So that allows for more efficient copying operations. But we still have to be careful and actively inspect and avoid older kernels and stuff like that. So there's going to be changes like that going forward with new kernel interfaces.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. So I'm curious if somebody, say, listening to this, decides, I'd like to get involved with Coreutils. That seems like my kind of thing. I'm always keen to ask people who've made a career out of this and who have contributed and become maintainers on these projects. Do you have any advice to somebody? What's the best way to get involved and to to come along? Is there anything you particularly need, say, from the community that you think would be great if we had somebody who could do X, Y, Z?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a to-do file in the main repo. There's if you look on the main GNU Coreutils mailing list, there's if you sit on that for any period of time, really, you'll get an idea of the work we're interested in doing, and but generally the work that's needs to be doing and interested in doing. There's no, we don't have we do. I guess I'm saying we don't have a bug tracker, but we do have. If you go to bugs.gnu.org / there's a Coreutils section there. and so there are some outstanding bugs that need to be handled as well. And just in general, we're always very accepting of just interactions and patches on the list, and we'll try and guide people. Like we're very, very interested in getting code and new people involved in the project.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's the lifeblood of every project, I suppose. So Jonathan and I have just been having a little discussion in the back channel here about GitHub, because I didn't think you used GitHub, but apparently Jonathan says you are on GitHub, and being that we talked about contribution and so on, I was curious, do you accept pull requests from GitHub?
We kind of do unofficially. So
Okay.
we have a GitHub mirror, and we probably change that a little bit going forward, because it's become more, GitHub has become more ubiquitous since we had a policy. So currently you can make a pull request against the Coreutils mirror, which I set up about 10 years ago. And just to consolidate things on the mailing list, we give people advice. Like when you make a pull request, as the main commit message, it puts in that you should send it to the mailing list, but you can still create the pull request. So we might change the policy there to that we will support pull requests separately as well, because and I have looked at pull requests there over the last while, and I do monitor that all the time. So, yeah, that's actually, I'll add that to my to-do list this evening to change the wording.
We're giving you
there.
work to do.
Yeah.
I feel bad now.
No. That's our job. No, that's interesting to me. I very much get the hesitation that particularly free software projects have and GNU projects have about using GitHub, because it's not all open source software, and I definitely get why people don't love that. But at the same time, it's so useful, and it, like you said, it's become so ubiquitous that it makes things so much easier for people to come in and add, a trivial or a small pull request without having to go to the mailing list. A lot of projects have to wrestle with this.
I don't wrestle with it too much. I'm definitely on the side of the fence that I'm not kind of very binary on you can't do this and you can't do that. The world is grey, so I'm on the side of the fence that whatever gets the best logic into the most people is best, and most people are used to using GitHub, so I have no issue with using GitHub at all.
Yeah, that seems to be where a lot of projects are coming down. All right. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to make sure and let folks know about? And I know that's a tough question because you have to think about all the things you wanted to talk about and all the things we've talked about and do that set comparison. But
a death. Do a death.
No, I scanned my notes here, and I think that was a very all-encompassing set of questions. So I think you've got everything there.
Yeah, we try. What's the weirdest thing that somebody has done with Coreutils that you're aware of? Have you gotten any user stories that have just surprised you, or maybe requests that have just been off the wall or very surprising?
Yeah, that's Jesus. Nothing comes to mind there.
Maybe the recurse up the tree was
the answer there. That was the most off the wall one, I guess. There was an interesting set of videos I saw from, I think it's Robert Elder. He went through a set of Coreutils recently, and he did a set of videos where every command, he started off that every command was his favorite command, but he had very interesting use of timeout for avoiding saturating his network with a backup. So he'd start off a backup, but if the backup... So the backup would keep copying stuff that hadn't copied already, but he'd time it out after 2 hours. So I just thought that was a very, very interesting use. So he'd time out his backup, but it would run the next night, and then it had left out where it went before, so it would eventually copy his files across. But there's lots of esoteric uses. I guess so many esoteric uses that I can't remember very many particular ones over time.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have people that write these one-liners where it's 15 different commands, and most of them are going to be Coreutils commands, and they do something, ridiculous or really impressive. So there's a bunch of them out there.
Well, and on the other hand, like looking at questions on the Stack Overflow and stuff like that, and there's, I'm just, people are, I don't know why they do things the way they do. Like, it's just, I should have a section. I definitely don't do this with Coreutils commands, but each to their own,
That would be amusing to read that FAQ. The things you definitely shouldn't do with Coreutils. Oh, that'd be great. All right, well, I've got to ask you before we let you go, what is your favorite scripting language and text editor?
Oh, interesting. Scripting language. Well, what is a scripting language?
That's true.
I'd say my favorite interpreted language is Python. So does that count? As,
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's one I've used for a long time now, and I get the most flexibility and functionality out of it. And
text editor?
Text editor, I use VI. Mm-hmm. An interesting part of that that's worth mentioning quickly is that the interface is, I use CLI a lot, I guess, obviously, and so the main like Unix has not been designed kind of cohesively. It's kind of evolved in separate kind of factions with sysv and BSD and stuff like that. So the kind of the interfaces have kind of evolved to be Vi versus Emacs in various commands. So I've set up all my systems to have Vi key bindings, and it actually helps with speed of interface and helps with RSI, which I don't have any RSI ever, but maybe that's the reason.
It's going to be the secret why.
Yeah.
It's funny you ask what counts as a scripting language. We had the creator of Bash on back several years ago, and I asked him if Bash counted as a scripting language, and I think he was sort of offended that I asked the question.
Yeah.
It's one of these things.
Yeah. All right, Pádraig, thank you so much for being here. The hour flew by, and we had a great time, and I think really covered a good corpus of information on the Coreutils, and it was a blast to have you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Much appreciated.
Yeah. All right. What do you think?
Yeah, I think as I kind of said at the top of the show, everybody's used Coreutils, whether they know it or not. I think anyway. I say everybody. I would imagine these days with the amount of things we've got in devices that are running all kinds of different stuff. And one thing I actually found very interesting that Pádraig told us about was because we mentioned BusyBox and embedded. I've got a lot of friends who work in embedded Linux and in that kind of world, and I didn't realize you could get like a 2 megabyte implementation of Coreutils. Now I don't know if they know that or if people from because I also know people who work with BusyBox and they're going to hate me if I say don't use that, use Coreutils, it'd be better. But it's options, isn't it? But very interesting stuff, and I think the ubiquity of this is so amazing, and the responsibility that it puts on maintainers like Pádraig and the other people involved, that this is used everywhere. So I imagine that it must be quite a weight to kind of bear.
Yeah. It's like we said, it says a lot about the project and the way that they run it, that it's been around for so long and it's still a healthy project.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's neat to see. And I also find it real fascinating. So I couldn't help but think when they were talking about how they very carefully make changes. There's this line from the Lord of the Rings books where they discover some like wonderful cavern, and Gimli tells Legolas that he wished he had some of his kin to come and work on it. And Legolas is like, "You would make changes to that? It's so beautiful." And Gimli says some line about, "We would only remove one rock every 100 years to try to make it better." And that's kind of how I feel that they're working with Coreutils. We make one breaking change every 20 years.
Yeah.
We didn't get to ask him about it, but apparently Coreutils itself has a really good record when it comes to security as well. Something like only 5 CVEs in the last 13 or 20 years, something like that. And I wish I thought of that during the show to ask him about. But they're really doing great work.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
All right, well, I think that is it for Coreutils. Do you have anything that you want to plug, Dan?
Yeah, I should mention some people, long-time listeners of Floss Weekly, will remember an event called OggCamp that I used to run in the UK, which is a free software open source unconference bar camp style event. It was at one time the biggest in the UK. I don't know if it still is. Well, it's hard to say that it still is because this is the first one for 5 years. There's going to be one. So what I'm doing here, burying the lead, is there's going to be one in October, and it's been picked up. Thankfully, we got stopped in our tracks by COVID, as a lot of people did. But the event's coming back, and it's going to be in Manchester. It's in October this year. You can go to oggcamp.org. That's oggcamp.org. And you can get tickets on there. You can find out what's going on. And I'm not actually organising it anymore, but Simon Phipps of this parish is on the organising team. And if you want to get involved, you want to find out more about it, you can come to Manchester and you want to talk or do a workshop or any of those sorts of things, then let us know and head to oggcamp.org.
Yeah, excellent. So things I want to plug is, of course, we thank Hackaday for being the new home of Floss Weekly, and you should make sure and tune in next week because we're talking to Carl Ritchell about Cosmic. The new alpha release of Cosmic is out with their Rust-based compositor. Some really fun stuff there. I'm going to chat with him about it. And then, of course, you can follow my security column. Goes live Friday mornings on Hackaday. And then we've still got the Untitled Linux show over at Twit, and that is always a blast. That is every Saturday. And we have a lot of fun there talking about Linux news and some open source news as well. But that's a much more Linux flavored show than this one is. But you should definitely check that out as well. I very much appreciate Dan being here as co-host, and we appreciate everyone that watches and listens, both live and on the download. And we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.